Greetings. We start with an article from The Guardian Co. UK. Oh, and a cat has just joined me, so there's going to be two of us doing the presentation. Say hello to Cat. That's it. Leopold Kohr warned 50 years ago that the gigantist global system would grow until it imploded. We should have listened. So can we say that this economic collapse is a crisis of bigness? I don't think the article really justifies that, but I've pulled this one paragraph from the article. Drawing from history, Kohr demonstrated that when people have too much power under any system or none, they abuse it. The task, therefore, was to limit the amount of power that any individual, organisation or government could get its hands on. The solution to the world's problems was not more unity but more division. The world should be broken up into small states, roughly equivalent in size and power, which would be able to limit the growth and thus the domination of any one unit. Small states and small economies were more flexible, more able to weather economic storms, less capable of waging serious wars, and more accountable to their people. Not only that, but they were more creative. On a whistle-stop tour of medieval and early modern Europe, The Breakdown of Nations, the book that Kohr wrote, does a brilliant job of persuading the reader that many of the glories of Western culture, from cathedrals to great art to scientific innovations, were the product of small states. There's quite a lot in there, isn't there, really? I think we will go to smaller bite-sized pieces of the world. This global economy, I think, will break up. No, I won't use... I was going to go on one track. I'll go to another track. On this, demonstrated that when people have too much power under any system, they abuse it. I think it could be a strange quirk that... I've been listening to quite a lot about Susskind's new book about President Obama, and how it would be possible, using Kohr's thinking there, that America has been so dominant in the world since the Second World War, and the president is not omnipotent, as we've certainly seen with Obama's performance, but is capable of actually exercising an awful lot of executive power. But what we have in America is basically a corrupt system where corporations, well, anybody that can, via money, can buy influence over the president, is the short term, or the president's advisors, or the president's team, or anybody, Congress, Senate. Basically, the power is bought. And in a way, if we think about it on Kohr's way of thinking here, this has been inadvertently a decent way of breaking up what could be either the president's power or a clique of top senators' power or whatever it might be, because basically it's anybody with money that can buy the power. So it's an ever-shifting feast. Not a good way of saying it, but do you see what I mean? That it was capable, if it was just political power, to be malign and to establish itself as a real power base. But it hasn't, because it's just bought into bits. Yeah, yes, no, sorry. Okay, moving on. Excuse me, kitty. This is more for Australia than anybody else, because what Doug Short has done here in this chart, he's got the Nasdaq up to its maximum in green, the Shanghai Composite at its maximum in red, and the Australian All Ordinaries share index in blue. And he's noted that the Nasdaq and the Shanghai fell basically down to 60%, 1,000 days after their maximum. That's the red and the green down in the bottom right. And the Australian All Ordinaries is only 40% down. The implication is that any time soon the All Ordinaries will go down and join the Nasdaq and the Shanghai. And you say, well, why should it? But the way things are going in the world, I wouldn't be surprised if not in the next few days, but before 1,250 days are up, that the Australian All Ordinaries does in fact go down to minus 60%. Okay, like a dog back to his vomit, or whatever the expression is. Horrible expression, isn't it? 6 weeks to save the Eurozone. Excuse me, but I just got a hair coming up from my moustache and tickling inside my nose, but you don't need to know that, do you? But that's why I'm going like that all the time. Right, there might have been nothing concrete from the IMF meeting in Washington over the weekend, but the outline of a plan to rescue the Eurozone and its banks was sketched out. There would be a haircut or write-down of Greek sovereign debt of 50%. The country would also stay in the Eurozone. There's a plan to recapitalise Europe's banks, and of course Greek banks will be heavily in there because they hold most of the Greek debt, of course. And most intriguingly, a proposal to increase the size of the €440 billion European Financial Stability Facility by linking up with the ECB. One proposal is that the EFSF will backstop 20% of any losses that the ECB makes on its purchases to provide some $2.2 trillion of firepower. Now that's a lot of ammo. Easier said than done, of course, and critically it boils down to whether Germany and EU law allow the ECB to effectively finance budgets. And that's the basics of it. They've got a plan there that is to a certain extent feasible, but it is, for the moment, horrendously against the law. And another summation of this. The Telegraph reports that a plan emerged over the weekend between Eurozone and global leaders to increase the size of the EFSF, the Eurozone's bailout fund, to €2 trillion, possibly using a leverage scheme through the ECB. It is thought that the increased fund would act as a backstop to allow for a Greek default, possibly involving a 50% write-down of Greek debt and a recapitalisation of European banks. Although the Greek government still insists it will not default. Though some media reports claim that a deal could be announced within days. German Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble seemed last night to reject the proposal, saying, "We don't come to grips with the economy's deleveraging by having governments and central banks throwing, literally, even more money at them. You simply cannot fight fire with fire." Strange thing to say for a finance minister, as in what a lot of people seem to admit in their spare time to be the truth. Jens Weidemann, Bundesbank president, called the plan dangerous path, while the Secretary General of Junior Coalition Partners FDP, Christian Lindner, called on the German Chancellor Angela Merkel to rule out very quickly that there are no changes to the rules for the EFSF via the back door. And the bossman of the Währungsgericht, or whatever it is, the constitutional Währungsgericht, something like that anyway. The Constitutional Court, the fellas with and the girls, there were girls in there with stupid red hats on. Imagine going around wearing silly hats. And he's come out in an interview saying, "Faites attention, hein?" but in German. It's going to be an awful lot of strain on these people, and I feel very sorry for Germany that they so much want to now go by the rule of law. But the rule of law has got to be changed to save the world. Finish with two charts. This is the Maastricht Treaties, Growth and Stability Pact, the 3 and 60, as in you want deficits no more than 3% of your GDP, and then when those deficits add up, they're not to add up to more than 60% of your GDP when they're totaled. This one is government deficits as a percentage of GDP across the European community as a whole. They were not far off the 3%, a lot of times below it, but getting then back above it all the way until the crisis hit in 2008. And you can see now the average is round about 6.5%, over double what it should be. And the government debts as a percentage of GDP were always over the 60 since the beginning. And now you can see that horrible neck up where it's gone from 67.5% of debt as a percentage of GDP at the start of the crisis to over 85 and rising now. Growth and Stability Pact, written in black and white in the Maastricht Treaty, it's law. See you tomorrow.